Great Demon King, Chapter 57. Killing and Robbing. A dust cloud formed in the distance as dull, heavy footfalls resonated like a somber drumbeat through the air. One by one, a row of gleaming longswords emerged into view, followed shortly by the sight of the strong orcs mounted on their giant wolf steeds. It was immediately evident that these orc wolf riders had already conducted a round of looting. The bags slung over the backs of their giant wolves were bulging with spoils. The once orderly shops of the town of Droll now appeared ravaged, as if raided until not even a single shingle remained. Perhaps it was because the orc wolf riders were burdened with too many spoils of war, but even the speed of the giant wolves beneath them had noticeably diminished. In contrast, Beecher and the others, riding their spindly battle steeds, had managed to make it to this place with relatively little delay, their lighter mounts allowing for quicker movement through the chaos. Hidden behind a large rock, Han Shuo gripped a sturdy, powerful crossbow with practiced ease. His eyes were fixed steadily on the orc leader of the group, a particularly stalwart orc whose bearing exuded authority among his kin. At his side, Fanny held a crossbow as well, her fingers deftly adjusting her aim and continuously shifting the direction of her attack. Her eyes shone with resolute light, a testament to her hardened determination in the face of mortal danger. Nearby, Lisa's hands were empty, but she stood ready with several large boulders conveniently placed by Han Shuo earlier. These boulders, heavy and unyielding, had been carefully positioned as part of a trap. All they required was a strong push to send them rolling, a weapon more devastating than any crossbow could be. Accompanied by the howls of the giant wolves, a column of more than 10 wolf riders finally appeared at the entrance of the narrow passageway. Their speed was ferocious, swift as the wind and quick as lightning, and they had not anticipated that an ambush would be sprung upon them. They swung their longswords and bellowed wildly, their combined roars echoing through the corridor and spurring their giant mounts onward. Suddenly, the front legs of several leading wolves were caught by tripwires. The tension in the carefully laid snares caused the front legs to buckle, and they emitted desolate howls as 4 of the wolf riders, driven by momentum, were violently hurled off the backs of their giant wolves. With a series of deep, resonant crashes, pa-pa-pa, the 4 orcs, their balance shattered, tumbled headlong into the acid bog set up earlier, landing with resounding, dull thuds. The orcs that had plunged into the acid bog erupted into ghastly screams. It was as if the acid had immediately begun to devour their flesh, blood, hair, and clothing, dissolving them into a macabre mixture of bloody water. In an instant, these 4 orc wolf riders were reduced to enormous skeletons, their former forms all but erased. Soon after, 3 more wolf riders lost their footing and were similarly dragged into the acid bog, disappearing in the blink of an eye as their bodies disintegrated into skeletal remains. This acid bog is worthy of the title of advanced necromancy, all right. Master Fanny, you're amazing. You must teach me this magic when we make it back to the academy, Han Shuo said in low, excited tones, his voice mingling admiration with the thrill of battle upon witnessing the acid bog's ruthless effect. However, as soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly noticed that Fanny's face had turned ghastly white. Her usually steely gaze toward the acid bog now held a note of alarm and distress. Concerned, Han Shuo gently bumped into Fanny and asked, "Master Fanny, is everything all right?" Fanny quickly recollected her senses after being jostled by Han Shuo, replying frantically, "No, nothing. This is the first time I've tried casting this acid bog magic since I mastered it, and I truly hadn't anticipated that it would be so pernicious." Her voice trembled with a mixture of frustration and apprehension as she evaluated the devastating effects of her own spell. Just as Han Shuo and Fanny were discussing the unexpected outcome of the acid bog, chaos erupted outside. The 10 or so orc wolf riders, now disoriented by the ambush, crashed into one another in a frenzy of confusion. The front had abruptly hauled on the reins, stopping their giant wolves, while those in the rear could not halt their charge in time. A few orcs fell off their giant mounts from the impact, tumbling to the ground as their formation disintegrated. In the ensuing mayhem, the carefully set tripwires and acid bog lost their intended purpose. The orcs, desperate to regain their footing and reform their ranks, began calling out in a cacophony of voices, their panic mounting as the chaos spread. "Kill." At that moment, Han Shuo suddenly gathered his strength and roared out loud. His voice, resonant and commanding, cut through the tumult like a clarion call. Lisa and the others had already hurriedly sharpened their weapons and were itching for action. When they heard Han Shuo's shout, they too joined in the frenzied effort, pushing the giant boulders that had been set up as traps down the hill. More than 10 massive boulders, already positioned with precise intent, were suddenly set in motion. Leveraged by their own mass and momentum, these boulders rolled or even flew down the hill with imposing force, accompanied by enormous rumbling sounds that shook the very ground. In that instant, the orc wolf riders, once the hunters, became the prey. The massive boulders transformed into indiscriminate weapons, crushing and reaping the lives of the orcs as they were caught off guard by the sudden brutal onslaught. The orcs, already huddled together like sardines, and without the opportunity to reorganize their formation, suffered immensely. 4 giant rocks rained down upon them, smashing 6 orcs and their giant wolf steeds into a gruesome blood mess. The relentless cascade of boulders continued down the slope, each impact accompanied by agonized shouts and wails that filled the area. When the wave of giant rocks subsided, another 15 wolf riders were found dead on the ground, their bodies shattered by the unyielding force. Another 10 or so suffered injuries of varying magnitudes, their cries of pain merging with the chaotic din. As the orcs screamed in panic and desperation, they suddenly realized that the only way back was blocked by the very large rocks that had been displaced during the ambush. In a desperate attempt to escape, many of them hastily retreated, only to be met with further curses and volleys of crossbow bolts, and magic attacks from figures emerging from the hill slopes. Crude and barbaric orcs, die. All of you. On the opposite side, Irene from the Light Major stood on the slope, her face twisted in disgust as she cursed in a low, determined voice. With a few swift gestures, she began chanting light magic, launching a series of attacks alongside Beecher. Their combined assault, driven by both fury and desperation, was aimed squarely at the orc wolf riders, who had become their target for venting accumulated frustrations after the relentless pursuit. At this moment, around 30 or so orc wolf riders remained in the passageway. These survivors now had to contend with the relentless magical attacks coming from both sides of the hills. Wielding his crossbow with calm precision, Han Shuo aimed carefully at the advancing orcs. Each crossbow bolt he fired was lethal enough to fell an orc, even if it only grazed them. The bolts ensured that those hit would not recover, no matter if they had suffered only a minor wound. The efficiency of his aim was such that once an orc was struck by one of Han Shuo's bolts, it would collapse and never stand again. Oh, how come the orcs that you've hit never seem to rise again, even if they've only been grazed? The ones I've hit, as long as I haven't struck a vital area, only suffer minor discomfort, Fanny asked in confusion as she observed the battlefield, her brow furrowed in genuine inquiry. Han Shuo let out a soft, amused laugh. That's a given. Earlier, I took the time to sprinkle some poison dust on my quiver of crossbow bolts, so even a tiny dose of poison is enough to ensure that they're finished for good. His voice was calm, laced with a quiet satisfaction as he continued to methodically eliminate his foes. Fanny's eyes widened in shock, and she pointed at Han Shuo with a vicious tone. You're a bit despicable, all right. Where did you learn such evil methods? We can't use poisoned arrows even if 2 countries were at war. This is an unwritten rule of the profound continent. Shrugging slightly, Han Shuo replied diffidently. This is a fight between life and death. Being despicable has nothing to do with it. Killing them at the lowest cost is the proper method. You cling too stubbornly to outdated rules and ideas. Before long, Lisa interjected with a tone of bitter agreement. Guys, Brian is right. These damned orcs burned, killed, looted, and raided in the town of Droll. They take advantage of us every winter to raid along the borders of the Empire. There's no need to speak of rules with them. Her words, though harsh, resonated with the pragmatic brutality of the moment. Fanny rolled her eyes at both of them and suddenly admonished them severely. You 2 brats are both lily-livered. I'll let it go this time, but mark my words, if anyone finds out about this, there will be consequences. Her tone was icy, a reminder that even in chaos, some order must be maintained. Han Shuo understood Fanny's good intentions. The poison powder sold in Droll was meant for use against the savage, violent magical creatures of the dark forest, not for this kind of open warfare. Still, his inner thoughts were unyielding. Even if his life was in jeopardy, he would throw caution to the wind and use every method at his disposal, even if it meant breaking every rule. His internal disdain for outdated customs burned as fiercely as the poison dust on his bolts. Under the combined assaults of crossbow bolts and magical attacks, the remaining orc wolf riders had little recourse but to use their own crossbows to target the ambushers on the hillsides. Yet, Han Shuo and his companions had firmly secured the advantage of terrain and numbers. With a relentless onslaught of attacks, The orc wolf riders began to fall one by one into pools of blood, each death marking the collapse of their once formidable formation. When only 5 wolf riders remained, panic overtook them. The giant wolves, hindered by the large rocks that now blocked their path, could no longer support their riders. In desperation, the orcs abandoned their mounts and began to retreat, shedding their ill-gotten spoils from the bulging bags in a frantic bid to escape. Oh no, they're getting away. If they escape, more wolf riders will surely follow. Everyone, chase after them. Han Shuo's voice rang out sharply as his facial expression shifted drastically. He shouted with urgency, though his body remained momentarily still. A brief pause in the chaos that allowed him to assess the situation before launching into action. The sudden command sent everyone into a frenzied chase. The necromancy students and teachers who had been previously scattered rushed down the slope in a desperate bid to pursue the fleeing orcs. The 3 warriors who had been hiding nearby sprinted with remarkable speed, racing down the rocky slope as if the terrain were smooth and level. A group of mages followed in close pursuit, their staffs raised and their expressions resolute. Beecher, Jean, Bach, and several other necromancy students joined the chase, their voices and footsteps merging into a cacophonous chorus of determination. Just as Fanny tentatively emerged from behind a giant boulder, about to join the chase, Han Shuo suddenly reached out and abruptly wrapped his arm around Fanny's waist in a swift, unexpected hug. In a low, conspiratorial voice, he asked, "It's so dangerous. Why are you going?" Fanny's slender waist, caught in Han Shuo's grip, sent a jolt through her that left her momentarily numb. She turned to see that the other necromancy students, who were also about to leave, were all staring at her in a mix of curiosity and reproach, especially Lisa, whose eyes burned with repressed anger. Startled, Fanny's face flushed a deep red as she began to struggle fiercely, her tone rising in anger. "What are you doing? Hurry and let go of me. Why are you holding me back?" Her words were laced with both indignation and a hint of genuine concern. "They won't miss us. And don't we have more important things to do right now?" Han Shuo released his grip with a chuckle that bordered on mischievous. "What else could be more important?" Fanny and the others asked in unison, perplexed by his nonchalance. "Collect the spoils of war. The resources in those bags on the giant wolves are all dazzling gold coins when brought back to the Empire." Han Shuo laughed heartily, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of triumph and determination as he dashed down from the hill. Fanny, Lisa, and the others stood dumbfounded, their earlier apprehension giving way to a sudden, frantic drive as a few other determined strangers rushed downhill as well. With raucous cries of triumph, they hurried to the fallen wolf riders to collect the spoils of war, paying little heed to decorum or protocol.